So, as I'm sure some of you are pretty aware, I am a pretty active reader, mainly of fantasy books. I really like fantasy books. But additionally, as well as I've been reading for a really long time, I also know a lot about folklore, pantheons, a lot about pantheons. I really love fairy tales, so I'm well versed in all of that. And I consider myself a bit of a fantasy expert. And I have uncovered something in a lot of contemporary fantasy book that kind of troubles me, and I like to call it the theory of inverse detail. Basically, what the theory of inverse detail means is that authors will sacrifice good character development and strong character personality, strong protagonist personality, mainly, in favor of having and explaining a detailed and very complex universe, which kind of is weird to me. And so I start out by telling you about a book that you've most likely read to show my point. Have the Harry Potter series, and alright, J.K. Rowling has an actual reason for explaining the universe in big detail, because Harry Potter has been raised as a muggle. He doesn't know about the wizarding world. As the book goes on, you determine that this is a very, intense, different universe. In the first book, there's a lot of kind of, stuff you learn about the wizarding world in a very short amount of time, and in all of this, his character gets a little kind of laid back. He's not as, he didn't stand out as much as a character, as much as, Ron and Hermione or someone did. And as the books go on, he kind of slowly develops more of a personality, but I thought it was really funny because in book 5, he's like, bam, I'm emo now! Now I have more character! So yeah, it's kind of uneven character development. Let's go on to the next book. Okay. The next is probably one of my favorite authors, but he does do this a lot, and he actually has problems with his protagonists, I've noticed. He writes a lot of really static characters, but it ends up working for him. He writes good books, but it is kind of a bit of a flaw. This author is, of course, Neil Gaiman. Begin with Stardust. Main character, I can't remember the main character's name. Tristran. That's how much I remember this character, apparently. Yeah, the character is just kind of motivated by one thing throughout the entire book, and that's going to find the falling star for Victoria, and that's his one motivation. He's kind of not impulsive. He has drive, he has enough drive to do something crazy, which is crossing the wall, but he's a very static character. It's his flaw. Neil Gaiman has reasons for explaining the universe in great detail because Tristram did not grow up there. So there are reasons, but still, he is unremarkable enough that I forgot the main character's name. Moving on to Neverwhere. Anyway, is almost the exact same character as Tristram. His name is Richard Mayhew. He goes from his world into another part of the world, which is London below, to help a door. So he actually has a bit of character development. He's a caring guy. He wants to make sure a door is safe. But in the end, he just stays static. He just kind of lays low. That's all the other characters, which they were really good supporting characters in this book. One of the reasons I love this book. But at the end, he almost goes back to normal London instead of staying in London below. And I'm like, dude, what? He just I like my normal life. And he's like, wait, no, I don't. I love London below. So he goes back. Still, issue. I know I can think of a lot of other fantasy books that totally fulfill the theory of inverse detail, but let me end with this series of novels. Let me just say, what the fuck? Okay. So anyone who's read these books, and I'm not a huge fan of these, but I do think they're really entertaining, so I read them. And I can't resist vampires. So don't blame me. I don't think they're the greatest books ever, but I don't think they're the worst things ever written. Anyone who's read these books can tell me that Bella Swan is probably one of the most one-track mind, not terribly interesting heroine. If you met her on the street, you would not want to be her friend. She's just kind of whatever. Yeah, first of all, I'd say that Stephenie Meyer totally fulfilled the whole theory of inverse detail, but really her universe, her fantasy universe in this book is not very complicated. What the hell? Yeah, it's just vampires and you kind of, well, there's kind of some other stuff, like there's the Vulturi in the second book, and they're a bit more complicated and you find out about their whole histories and stuff, so yeah, but regardless, these books didn't have a fantasy background, Bella would still be pretty boring. Regardless, these books kind of fail and are like, they don't fail, but they totally represent failure in the theory of inverse detail. The last book I'd like to tell you about that really fulfills the theory of inverse detail that I have on me. I don't actually know where my copy of this is, and that sucks because I really want it, is Sabriel. And yeah, again, a really like kind of reserved, tough character, but also has a very detailed universe. Like, it comes kind of gradually, but at the same time, it's kind of like a weird universe to get used to, because the whole necromancer thing going on, and then travels to the other side of the wall, and there's all this crazy shit going on. So it's a lot, and there's lots of action in Sabriel, so yeah. You could say it's just part of her character, but it also kind of goes with a very understated, the general theme of the theory of inverse detail is very understated, just kind of like passive observer type character who is learning all this stuff about their universe, typically. Which she is. She didn't grow up there. She just kind of knows a bit about it, and she's learning more. So, universe over character. Which is a nice segue into the next book of that series, which is Lirael. And already, it's a different protagonist who is Lirael, and it's the same universe, kind of. She has a different role in the universe, basically. But she is a really, like, strong, detailed main character. She's, like, really has a lot of, like, angst and depression, kind of, and she's really rebellious, and she just does, like, crazy stuff. Like, she'll, like, lie for no reason, which I thought was really funny. Regardless, I think it's kind of interesting that once Garth Nix had gotten all the universe information taken care of for the Old Kingdom series, Lirael got like a way more like dynamic, like interesting, like out there personality than Sabriel did. Anyway, next book is really good. I actually just finished reading it. It's called Kushiel's Dart. And first of all, it's a vastly different fantasy book than I've ever read. The fantasy part of it is very, like, kind of subtle. The author kind of sets up some things about the universe immediately, and then it slowly, like, kind of, like, draws out. But she doesn't really give, like, a ton of, like, overwhelming detail. Which is good, because it makes room for the main character, Phaedra, to have a really good personality of her own. She's, like, very smart, like, she's kind of impulsive, but she can read people really well. Basically, she has a very full, well-rounded personality. And Jacqueline Carey did a good job on being the theory of inverse detail. Another book that is a lot better and goes over the theory I thought of is my favorite series, The Golden Compass. And basically, initially, you get like no background information about the universe. It's just kind of like immediate things going on, and you get to know the character really well. She's pretty intriguing. She's a firecracker. I don't know. Yeah, you don't really get any explanation like about like the fantasy element of his Dark Materials series immediately. You kind of have to like figure out about it on your own, draw your own conclusions, and it's really gradual how the author details the intricacies of this particular universe. And the last one is a book that like no one's read except me, but I think more people should because it's really good, is Wet Apples by Jonathan Carroll. And initially this book doesn't seem like a fantasy book, it just seems like a normal book, normal fiction. And the main character is this guy named Vincent Ettrich. I haven't read this in a while, so the details are kind of not in my head, but he was definitely like very like dynamic, like thinking for himself, draws his own conclusions, does crazy shit kind of guy. And yeah, initially you don't really, they kind of draw the fantasy elements of this really gradually, and it's very gradual. But it's a really good book. Like, I highly recommend if you haven't read it. Also, guess what? I have golden doubloons. I got them at the bank. I'm pretty psyched.